All right, you guys, back for another edition of the Ask Me Anything. I'll be fielding questions here today from the Facebook group. These are questions that are left over from last week that either A, Kip didn't get to, or he was too afraid to answer. Now, today he's on vacation, so it seems like every other week you're either going to hear from Kip or you're going to hear from me, but that's the way it goes. Also, we noticed when I was gone last week for the Ask Me Anything that we had a bunch of emails and messages from guys who said that they want to co-host in the future if I'm not able to make it or Kip's not able to make it, because I do think it's good to have the two of us, or at least two people, because it gives some room to bounce ideas off of and different thoughts and different angles on these questions. So we're going to entertain that. Because we always want to have two hosts on the Ask Me Anything. But today, because we didn't fully plan for this, you're just going to get me, and you're going to have to deal with it, whether you like it or not. That's what it is. But, I feel like I've got some insight, a little bit of insight. Now, I will tell you, I don't have everything pinned down, guys. No one man does, but I hope I can give you some honest perspectives and different ideas and opinions, because most of what I share is just opinion. It's not fact. I realize that. Although my black and white personality leads me to believe that sometimes it's just that simple. But I realize that not everything is that simple, but some things are. All right, guys, let's get into the questions here. I've got about 10 I'm going to try to get to today. We're going to start with Cody Reese. Every time we talk about finances, it seems to be a popular subject because I know a lot of you guys want to pay off debt, save money, retire, invest, et cetera, et cetera. So Cody Reese starts by saying, what are the best strategies to becoming debt free? Now, look, the best strategy is just to pay down your debt. That's the simple answer. But if we were to get more technical than that, as a former financial advisor, I would suggest to you that Dave Ramsey's debt snowball concept, which has been around for a long time, actually works. What you do is you take you list out all of your accounts or all of your debts that you have, and you list them from smallest to greatest. Now, some people will pour over the numbers and the data and say, well, you should pay off the one with the highest interest rate. And if this interest rate is higher than that interest rate by this many points, then you should pay that one off first. I get that mathematically. Sure, there's some exceptions and some cases to be made for doing this in a different way. But in my own personal experience, mathematically, it tends to work out better when you pay off the smallest debt first and then roll it to the next debt. And also, there's factors that you cannot calculate. Like, for example, the sense of pride or satisfaction or fulfillment that comes with actually paying off a debt. And what that does is that builds momentum so that you can keep on the path. It would be like going into the gym and never, like going to the gym for 5 or 10 or 15 years and never hitting a PR. Like, how long can you possibly do that for without seeing some improvement? And that's why I like the debt snowball strategy, starting with the lowest balance first. So you're going to list out those balances, and you're going to take whatever money you can apply. Maybe it's $50, $100, $1,000. I don't know what your situation is, which says that maybe you ought to consider where your money's coming from, where it's going. Can you track every dollar? Can you account for every dollar? If not, that's the first step. You need to know how much discretionary income you have so you can realize and understand how much you can apply towards debt. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, it's $200 a month. Could be less, could be more, but for the sake of argument, you have $200 extra per month that you can apply towards debt. So let's say that you have a $1,000 personal loan. I'm just doing easy math here. $1,000 personal loan, a $2,000 credit card, a $4,000 medical bill, and an $8,000 car payment, and it goes up from there. So you're going to pay the $1,000 off first. You're going to pay whatever the monthly payment is. Let's say it's $100. But you're also going to take that $200 discretionary income, and instead of making $100 payments, you're going to make $300 payments to that $1,000 personal line of credit that you have. And while you're paying that off, which should take you about 5 months or so, if you calculate interest and some of the things in there, while you pay that off, maybe 4 months, you're going to pay the minimum Not more. Please hear me. Not more. You're going to pay the minimum payment on the rest of the debts. Now, once the $1,000 is paid off, you're going to take the $200 discretionary income, and you're going to take the $100 payment that was for that personal line, and now you have $300 a month that you can apply towards debt, and you're going to apply that to the $2,000 balance. When that's paid off, let's say that takes you another 10 months, let's say. Then you're going to take the $200 you started with, the $100 from the personal loan, let's say $200 from the $2,000 balance, and now you have $500 that you're going to apply to I think I said it was a medical bill, the $4,000 payment. You guys get the idea. This is the best way to pay off debt. You can look at it and you can analyze and scrutinize, and maybe there's some exceptions to that, but I'm just telling you from a pure numbers basis, but also psychological basis, this is the best way to pay off your debt. It's the debt snowball. So that's what I suggest. All right, next question. So that was from Cody. Let's go to David. This is from David. Let me find him here. Osbjornson. He says here, philosophy has so much wisdom for us men out there. But what I've noticed is the lack of science us men don't really study. I don't know if I entirely agree with that premise, but let's keep rolling here. Do you think science helps develop us as better men? For example, in biology and space? Yeah, I mean, 100%. 100%. Anytime you study and gain knowledge and new information and new perspectives and new ideas and new ways of looking at things, and you're exposed to different information, you're going to be a more well-rounded individual. You're going to have more talents and abilities and marketable skill sets. You're going to think more critically. You're going to think differently about life and our relationship with the environment and how we interact. And I mean, yeah, the answer is yes, of course. It's going to develop us as better men. We'll be more capable. We'll be more intelligent. We'll be more well-rounded and potentially be able to turn some of these things into careers. So if you can study biology or space or engineering or things that are not related, like art and martial arts and other aspects of life, then absolutely you should take advantage of that, because the more you can learn, the better off you are. All right, let's go to Justin. Scroll down here. I'm looking at our Facebook group here. So this comes from Justin Doyle. He says, I was watching Entrepreneurs in Cars, and they talk about frame a lot. Frame is in the roles of the relationship for the man and the woman, and how that shapes the dynamics. I assume you know about quote unquote frame. I've heard about framing in a lot of different contexts, so I'm not entirely sure if I know what you're talking about in this context, but let's keep going. If not, then ignore the question. What I was curious of, though, is can you reframe a relationship? Years into a relationship, can you reframe the dynamics of who is who and who does what and so on? Well, absolutely. Absolutely, you can reframe the dynamic. Of course, you and your spouse need to be on board with the reframing and how it's going to go, and you need to talk through and work through how this is going to look and what this is going to be like. But yeah, I mean, consider that the inputs into your relationship have changed, right? The variables have changed. Maybe she got a promotion, or you got a promotion, or one of you needs to move, or kids came into the equation, or one of you, heaven forbid, had a medical condition or became disabled and couldn't work. So there's a lot of external variables that could come into question and could change the dynamic of your relationship. If you weren't able to adapt and she wasn't able to adapt, then how have millions and millions of other families been able to adapt to these changing environments with regards to their relationship? The answer, of course, is yes. Can you reframe the dynamics? So that's not the real question, because I think everybody would say, yes, you can reframe it. The real question, I think, is how do you reframe it? Not can it be done, but how do you do it? And that's where the real challenge lies. How do you teach an old dog new tricks, in other words, right? How do you do something different? How does she do something different? And here's the real challenge, is you and her probably have become so accustomed and so comfortable to your current roles that you pride yourself in your ability to do it effectively, right? I pride myself in my ability to bring home a substantial income and family household income so that we can have the experiences and I can put food on the table and a roof over my wife and my children's head and my head as well, but also have the experiences and the relationships and all that we have going on in our lives. And she prides herself, my wife prides herself on being able to stay at home and be a great teacher to our children. And as of the recording right now, I could look out my window in my office and I could look down to our garden, and I guarantee that she's out there working in that garden. And she prides herself on that. She prides herself on making sure that the house is warm and inviting and has an environment that fosters creativity and love and kindness and growth and all the things that we want to create in our lives. She prides herself on that. So if all of a sudden that changes for whatever reason, whether it's by design, intentionally we do it, or some external variable is thrust upon us, that's a challenge. You know, if I can no longer work, for example, because I was disabled or injured or incapacitated in some way, man, that would be really hard for me, because I pride myself on being in this role and doing it well. So that's not to say it can't be done, but it's going to require, and this is the how, it's going to require a lot of conversations, a lot of trial and error, a lot of probably contention and frustration. But I think if you leave the lines of communication open and you're honest with each other about what's working well and what isn't working well, and you communicate frequently about what's going on, then I think gradually and over time, absolutely, you can shift the dynamics and you can take pride in fulfilling a new role. And I hear it from a lot of guys who actually are injured or they have a medical condition that keeps them from doing what we would generally and typically consider the masculine role of providing, right? Going out into the workforce and bringing home the bacon, so to speak. And a lot of these guys, they struggle with that because of the medical conditions they're dealing with. Does that make them any less of a man? Well, if you don't contribute at all, then I think there's maybe a case to be made that you're being less manly. But there are other ways to contribute. Now, I don't entirely understand, for example, a man who stays at home and his wife goes out and works. I don't understand that. That would be hard for me to wrap my mind around, but I know that dynamic works for a lot of people. It poses its own set of challenges, sure. But can it work? Yeah. And a man can pride himself on his ability to do that type of work. So afford yourself some grace as things change. Know that it's not going to just like a light switch on the wall immediately switch overnight. There's going to be a lot of contention and frustration and growing pains as roles change, but it can be done. Absolutely. You just got to keep those lines of communication open. All right. That came from Justin Doyle. Let's go to this next one is from Mitch. Okay, so Mitch Ashbeck, and I've answered this question quite a bit, but I pulled this question out because it's very important to talk with you about this because we have an exciting announcement. So his question or topic he wanted to discuss was creating rites of passages for our kids, especially if I'm assuming he said if we didn't grow up with any. So maybe not entirely sure I understand that second part, but creating rites of passages for our children. So I'm not going to completely answer this question because I've answered it quite a bit. If you were to go to orderofman.com and just type in rite of passage, you're going to find probably half a dozen or more different topics, conversations, posts, podcasts on the subject, and you can find that easily. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is because my oldest son, his name's Brecken. He's going to be starting a new podcast here within the next 2 to 3 weeks. It's called Man in the Making. And we're going to be talking about rites of passages, along with other uncomfortable at times conversations like the birds and the bees and religion and God and money and culture and racism and all the conversations that we as fathers should be having with our sons. He's also going to be interviewing successful men and talking with them about how to turn from boy to man and how to do that effectively and step into that new role. So if you're interested and you're a father, Mitch, sounds like you are, and I'm sure that there's hundreds of thousands of you who are listening who are fathers, then I would suggest that you get signed up for early notification on that. And you can do that at orderofman.com/man in the making. Orderofman.com/man in the making. For now, type in rite of passage on orderman.com, and you'll find a lot of information there. Okay. All right. Next one, Ethan Foote. He says, how do you help others stop victimizing themselves and take life into their own hands instead of blaming others for all of their misfortune in life? Look, what I'm going to share with you is probably not as popular as what somebody else might share, but this is the reality. This is what I've found to be true anyways. Unless somebody's willing to help themselves, there's nothing you can do. And that's frustrating. As a man, we are problem solvers, right? We look for problems, we identify solutions, we implement said solutions, and then we keep driving on. We're hardwired generally to do that. And so what happens is you run across somebody that you love, a sister, a brother, a parent, potentially your spouse or a child, and you think, I want to fix this person. I don't want them to victimize themselves. I want them to take life into their own hands. I want them to stop blaming other people. And unless they realize that there's a problem, there's not a dang thing you can do about it. And how frustrating is that? And surely as you're listening to me say this, you're thinking to yourself, there must be something I can do. I guarantee that if you're at this point, you've probably done everything that you can do. Introduce them to good information, invite them into your circle, give them a book to read, give them a podcast to listen to, consult, coach, mentor, befriend these individuals. You've done all that stuff. If you haven't, you wouldn't be asking the question. And so you're at this point of probably this frustrating point where you just feel like they're not ready. And the only thing I would say to you in that case is that it's a bit like the prodigal son story in the Bible. You know, this man is thinking about a son and praying for a son, and his son leaves and he's continually thinking about him, but he realizes, there's nothing I can do about it. But when the son finally returns, and we can only hope and pray that they will, that he welcomes him with open arms. And that's how we have to act in this situation. Is that unless somebody's willing to fix themselves, what can you do? And even if you were able to do something, it will only be temporary until they really embrace that and own it for themselves. And a lot of people just aren't there yet. So give them the foundation, teach them what you can, invite them into your circle, and then just let the chips fall where they may. And hopefully when they're ready, they know exactly where to turn. And you can be that resource for them. All right, let's go to Tom Tyler. I like this one. He says, how do you deal with a narcissist mother-in-law? So fortunately, I don't have to deal with this. My mother-in-law is great, so I don't have to deal with this, which is a blessing because I know a lot of people do deal in difficult situations with their mothers-in-law. Again, I haven't had to, which is a wonderful blessing. But how do you deal with a narcissist mother-in-law? You just create boundaries. I mean, that's really what it is, guys. You just create boundaries because some people are just toxic. Some people are negative. Some people only care about themselves and nobody else and nothing else. And you've acknowledged that. You've recognized that. That's the first step. And now you have to create some boundaries to protect you and your children. And in a lot of times, your wife as well, because she may not see it or she may think that there's an ulterior motive. So there's a lot of conversations that need to take place here with your wife, your spouse, and also with your children and also with her, because it's not right to set up boundaries and establish boundaries, but then not communicate those boundaries to the people who will be impacted by those boundaries. So you and your wife need to come up with those boundaries together. Now, I can't give you specifics because I don't know exactly in the specifics of what you're dealing with, but if she cares only about herself and that ends up putting your kids at risk when they're there with her, well, you're the father. Your job, as we say in our motto, is to protect, right? Protect, provide, preside. So you have an obligation to protect your children. And some people say, well, I left her in my mother-in-law's care and she should be protecting them. Yes, but the buck stops with you. You're the dad. You're the father. That's your job. So you might be able to get other people involved, but the responsibility is on your shoulders. And so if your children aren't safe, and I can't imagine this is, you're afraid for their life or anything necessarily. If that's the case, that's kind of an easy solution. But, if they're emotionally not being taken care of, their needs aren't being met when they're with the mother-in-law, then yeah, you've got to establish some boundaries. You have to identify what those are. When can the kids see her? When can they not? What behavior will you tolerate? What will you not tolerate? And you and your wife get on the same page and then communicate that. Hey, we need to have a serious conversation. We're worried about X, Y, and Z. And you know what? She's not going to be happy about it. See, that's the thing. A lot of people think, well, if I just say it the right way or do it the right way, everything will be fine. No, that's not the case. A narcissist mother-in-law who you're going to establish some boundaries with, you think if you say it just right, everything will go fine? No, it's not going to go fine. And you need to be prepared for that. And your wife needs to be prepared for that. And she probably knows better than you because she's been around her longer than you have. So you need to be prepared for this thing not to go well. And if it doesn't go well, how are you going to handle that? What's the situation going to be? But the more you stick to your guns, and I think if you do it in a reasonable way, and the longer you stick to your guns, she will come around. The mother-in-law will come around because she wants to see you and her daughter and her children. That's what she wants. But in my family, it's my rules. It's not my mother's rules. It's not my mother-in-law or father-in-law's rules. They're my rules. I should say mine and my wife's. It's our rules. And you can play our game or you don't get to play. And it's as simple as that. All right, let's go to Chris Dalton. So here's an interesting one. I know this is a challenge for a lot of guys. He says, how to rekindle the sexual fire in the relationship after kids. Look, I really don't think it has to change other than you have a new variable in the equation that needs to be accounted for, right? Because when you don't have kids, it's easy. There's more spontaneity. You're probably not as exhausted and tired when you don't have kids as you are when you do. There's the ability to travel and to do exciting things. Yeah, that all is a little bit easier, we'll say, when you don't have kids. But that's not to say you can't do it when you do have children. Now, if they're young, if they're babies, that's a little different. But as they grow, some of this stuff will take place, and you'll have the opportunities to be spontaneous, to go on trips, to go on vacations. We were talking about mothers-in-law. I think it's completely acceptable and reasonable to ask that, your mother and father or your mother-in-law and father-in-law take little Timmy or little Susie for the night, and you plan something with your wife. Just take her out, take her to the movies, take her to a nice restaurant, take her to a game, whatever she's into, take her to that thing and be spontaneous and plan it all. That's what I would say. Just plan it all. Okay, because she's going to be exhausted, especially if you're just having children right now. She's tired, she's exhausted, she's been pulled on, maybe she's, nursing. Like, there's so much to this, and she's exhausted. And if you're asking her to plan all this out when she's in that mindset, it's just another chore for her. And putting another task or chore on her probably isn't going to turn her on. But what would turn her on is the fact that you figured it all out, that you did everything, that you planned it all, that you got the sitter lined up, and you make it happen. And I think that's generally what women want. I mean, guys, I can't tell you how often I hear from women who think or message me and say to me things like, Ryan, I'm so glad you're talking about this because I want a man who takes charge. These are women who, some of them are married and some of them aren't, but they're looking for men who take charge, who take initiative. And that turns them on emotionally, physically. And isn't that the point? You want to rekindle the sexual fire? That's a great way to do it. Be a man, act like a man, take some initiative and get it done. And in return, she's going to be turned on by that. And you will get what you want. She will get what she wants. And life will be better. It's a little harder when you have newborns. I get it. That's a season. But be spontaneous. Help where you can. Plan these things out. Get her some relief as needed from the children, that is. And she'll resist that, by the way. Right? This goes back to what I was saying earlier about women priding themselves on certain things and men priding themselves on certain things. She prides herself on taking care of the baby, which is good. She should be proud of that. If she wasn't proud of that, I would, as a husband and father, be a little concerned. So the fact that she prides herself on making sure that the baby or the toddler or the teenager gets what they need, I think that's a good attribute, but it needs to be tempered and it needs to be honed in and refined and managed. And you can help do that. And you should help do that, because that's going to be more beneficial for all of you guys, including the kids, by the way. Okay. All right, let's go to Fred. I think Fred's next. Let me look here. See if I can track him down here. Fred, where are you at? Here we go. There he is. Fred Anderson. Okay, so here, I like this question. This is one I get occasionally. But if you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, you know that I used to ask all my guests at the end of every interview, what does it mean to be a man? So, and I haven't done that for years now at this point. So Fred says, why does Ryan not ask the people he interviews, what do you believe it means to be a man anymore? There's a very specific reason. Well, there's a couple reasons. Number one, I felt like I was doing an injustice to my guest whenever I would have canned questions. And what I mean by canned questions is questions that I had written down that I knew I was going to ask my guest, because that detracts from a genuine conversation, right? Unless you're interviewing somebody for a job or getting into podcasting and you're a novice with podcasting, like you don't really ever have set questions. Like when's the last time you thought about, I want to have a conversation with my wife and I'm going to write down 5 questions that I'm going to ask her verbatim. Or when's the last time you said, hey, guys, we're going to do fight night. We're going to go to the game. Let's all get together. And you wrote down 10 questions that you were going to ask all of them. That's weird. It was weird. That's all it is. It's also disingenuous. And I realized that the more that I asked canned questions, the less valuable the answers were. And it wasn't doing justice to my guest. And I don't think it was doing justice to anybody listening. And then as I improved as a podcaster, as a conversationalist, I realized that I don't need to ask that question specifically. I can work that question into the conversations that I'm having. And if you listen carefully, you'll hear the answer to that question without me having to ask it. Because I'm asking about fatherhood and growing a business and how a man serves his community and how he steps up and how he takes care of himself. And all of those are actually answers to that question without having to ask that specific question. So I made the decision long ago, years ago at this point, to be more of a conversationalist rather than to be a host or an interviewer. I'd rather be a conversationalist. And conversationalists don't ask canned questions. They ask thoughtful, intelligent questions. They go down different rabbit holes and different routes, and they explore different concepts and things they didn't even realize that maybe would get drawn up in the conversation. That's what a conversationalist does. And so that's what I wanted to do. And so that's why. But the answers are still there, guys. What does it mean to be a man? Just listen to their answers. They're telling you. If they're talking about fatherhood, they're telling you, hey, I believe a man is this kind of father. Or if they're talking about taking care of themselves, what they're actually saying is that a man who values himself takes care of himself in this way. Or he shows up this way for his community, or he shows up this way at his work. That's the answer to that question without me having to ask the question. Kind of like a flank maneuver, right? You're flanking them. All right, let's go to the next one is, I think this one is John. Yep, John. All right, so John says, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce, I'm just going to call him John-O. John-O. John, you know who you are. All right, so he says, supporting your wife with kids is obviously important. However, is there a stage where you do too much? Yes. And begin to neglect your own requirement as a man? Yes. In other words, your personal development suffers. Or should you sacrifice this for the family in your view? Well, yeah, there's a point where you can do too much. And there's actually a couple different problems with this. All right, one is you hit it. You neglect your own requirements as a man. That's a big problem. We'll dive into that in just a minute. But there's another problem here too. When you do too much for somebody, you hinder and hamper their opportunities for growth and development. right? Because if your wife or your children are reliant upon you to do anything and everything physically, mentally, emotionally, then you're doing them a disservice, because when you're gone, and you will be gone, whether it's a vacation, a work trip that you need to take, or going and participating in your own activities and hobbies, like you're going to be gone at some, or you die, like you're going to be gone at some point. And unless you give your kids and your wife the opportunity to take care of themselves on their own occasionally, you're really hamstringing them. I know guys who, we used to go play basketball every Tuesday night, and we would talk with the guys about coming. Hey, you want to come? And some of these guys would say, well, I'd like to, but my wife really wants me home. I'm like, bro, it's one day a week. It's one Tuesday night after your kids are in bed. My wife really needs me. How pathetic. I mean, truly, that's the only way to look at that. How pathetic. Now, I don't know your situation. Maybe there's other things going on, or maybe there's some extenuating circumstances. But to hear these guys say this every single week began to become a little ridiculous. Your wife needs you at every given moment, or I'll be on hunts and outings and trips with guys, and they're like, their wives will call them like every couple of hours. I'm like, what the hell could she possibly have to say every couple of hours to you? Give me a break. My wife, if my wife calls me, if I'm on an outing and my wife calls me, the first thought is like, I'm a little concerned, because she doesn't normally call me. So what's going on? And I think that's a healthier approach, because she's somebody who's independent, who can take care of herself, who doesn't need me at every turn to be able to make her feel better. She can do that on her own. My wife doesn't need me. And frankly, I don't need her. Now, we choose to be together because we're better together. We enjoy each other's company. We love each other. We challenge each other in positive ways. So we want to be together, but it isn't a requirement. And that's where men should get with their wives. And by the way, if you have somebody who's needy and clingy and can't do anything without you, and you're dating that person, that's a serious red flag. That may not be a deal breaker, but I'm telling you guys, that is a serious red flag. What I would suggest is looking for a woman who in part is very independent, who doesn't need your approval at every turn, because it feels good when she needs you. It feels good, but it's going to get old. And that goes both ways, by the way. If you need her and you come across as desperate and needy, that's going to get old and wear on her too. And she's going to ditch you, just like you're probably going to ditch her. So yeah, there's a point where you're doing too much, and you and your wife need to communicate that. And you need to say, hey, hon, I'll give you an example. So every Monday and Wednesday night, I'm gone. I train. So 2 nights a week, she knows that I'm training. From this time to this time, I'm going to be training, and that's my time. Does that work for you? Yep, that works for me. Great, that works for me. Good, we get in the same schedule. And by the way, when I tell her that, I'm not asking for permission. Hey, hon, do you mind if I go on Monday and Friday or Monday and Thursday? No, I'm not asking her for permission. What I'm asking is, does this work with your schedule? Because I want to be respectful of that, right? And if she said, oh, actually, Monday and Thursday don't work, but Tuesday and Wednesday would be good days. Okay, I'm willing to work around that, because we've agreed and entered into this relationship where we help each other and we serve each other. But I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking you to get on schedule and let's figure this thing out together. And by the way, one of the nights that I go, that's her night too. So even when I get home, we say, hey, I take a shower, I get cleaned up, and she's doing her own thing. She's working in the garden or working on things around the house or taking a master class, but that time is hers. So it's just as important for her to get her time as it is for me. And don't make her feel bad too, guys. A lot of us will make our spouses feel bad or guilty for taking time for themselves. But if you want to take time for yourself, like, you should honor and encourage her to take time for herself. And by the way, she'll come back better. She'll be in a better mood. She'll be in a better emotional state if you honor her desire to do things without you. It's okay, and vice versa. All right, we're going to take a couple more. This next one comes from Steve Gerard, I think is how you would pronounce that. Sorry, Steve, butchered it, I'm sure. So July 4th was just a couple of days ago. Hope you had a happy Independence Day. And this was from last week, but he says, with July 4th on the cusp, how do you explain to your kids about the true meaning of Independence Day? Look, we read. We talk about the founding fathers. We read the Declaration of Independence. We listen to books, and we read books, and we study, and we explore, and we have these types of conversations. I don't think it's a difficult or challenging thing. In fact, I just had a conversation, I believe it was with my second son. We were going to get fireworks just yesterday as of this recording. And I said, do you know what this day is really about? And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, what is it? And he told me, he said, it's when we signed the Declaration of Independence. I said, what does that mean? And he kind of hemmed and hawed around it a little bit, didn't know how to fully articulate what that meant. So we discovered it. We talked about it. Here's what that meant. Here's what they did. And here's why that was important. And here's where it was before. In fact, last night, before we shot off some fireworks that we bought earlier in the day, we watched not Independence Day. Sorry, I'm looking at that. We watched The Patriot, which is a great movie. Of course, it's classic, right? So we watched The Patriot, and we talked about red coats and blue coats and why Mel Gibson's character had a red coat when he was a patriot and he was a blue coat. And we just talk. And one thing that I think we can do a better job of as fathers is asking questions. Because we constantly want to teach, and there's nothing wrong with that. We should be teaching and explaining. But I found just through asking questions, you can guide a conversation. You can gauge what your children know and what they don't know and where their gaps are and what they think about certain subjects just by asking questions. And you can explore and unpack and uncover just through that process. Last year or the year before, I think it was actually the year before, we went to DC and we saw all of these places, and we actually looked at the Declaration of Independence, and they got to see it with their own eyes. And we talked about it and discussed it. There's so many ways to do it. You just have to be open to it. You got to give yourself the space and margin to do it, because sometimes we get so busy that we don't take time to do these types of things, but these are the things that are important. So if you create that margin and you're thoughtful about it, you'll be able to have these conversations as well. All right, we're going to take the last question of the day. Comes from Mr. Brian King. All right, he says, at what point would you give up on a relationship with a friend or family member when you seem to be the one who is always contacting and reaching out to maintain the bond? I have also tested this by not reaching out to make contact, and the relationship seems to fade. This seems to happen frequently. Maybe I need to change my approach. Not sure. Well, look, relationships are reciprocal, or at least they should be. And if they're not, they're usually toxic in some way. So I don't know that there's this one singular point in every instance where you need to cut off the relationship, but I would be willing to bet that if you're asking this question and it seems to be something that is happening more frequently, is what you said, and it's reoccurring, then this is somebody who's not interested in the reciprocity of relationships. There needs to be a sacrifice, right? If I want to be in a relationship with somebody, whether it's my wife or my children, or just friends or colleagues and coworkers, there needs to be sacrifice on both parts. People need to be willing to invite you to things, to include you in things. And if they're not, and you're always the one going out of the way to ensure that they feel welcome and invited, et cetera, then this is not really a relationship. This is you just doing something for somebody, which is real nice, but at some point it just becomes charity, and it's not really about the friendship or the family relationship that you're interested in. So I would communicate it, actually. And I think this is one thing that we as men can work on a lot, is being more assertive. So Brian, if it was you and me, and I felt like I was always the one initiating the thing, and I felt like I was being slighted or you weren't initiating things, I would tell you that. Hey, Brian, man, I really enjoyed our friendship and I like having you over. Frankly, it just seems like I'm really the only one who's initiating any of the activities and things. Like, something up, or you could figure out, like, maybe they're having a problem, or maybe they're dealing with something, or maybe they're feeling awkward about something, or maybe they don't know what to do, or whatever. But like, I just address things head on. I'd rather do it that way than guess. You talk about testing. I think, yeah, maybe, but I don't like testing people and playing games with people. I'd just much rather just be way more assertive, or just say to yourself, it's not worth it. And again, this goes back to the question about the prodigal son. Leave the door open. That's what I would say. Leave the door open. And if they want to walk through it, that's on them. But you don't need to go over to their house and pick them up. And I'm talking about metaphorically, but just leave the door open. Hey, we're doing this thing on Saturday. If you want to come around, we're going to go have this outing if you want to be here. But also spend time building relationships with friends and family members who are interested in that. Because right now you're just focusing on the people who aren't, but focus on the people who are. You won't have time to think about this other stuff that's going on. And it actually might become more attractive to these people who actually want to get involved in a reciprocal relationship. All right, I hope that helps. All right, guys, we got some good questions today. Again, it isn't the same without Kip, but he'll be back next week. I should be around next week. So I think we've got through the past 2 months of us traveling and being on weird and conflicting schedules. So we'll both be back. But if not, again, like I said earlier, we're going to entertain the idea of having a separate co-host to be able to have 2 people talking, discussing, bouncing ideas off of each other, coming at it from different angles, because I think that's really valuable. One thing I wanted to mention is that I've been noticing and I talked about this yesterday on the podcast, but I've been noticing that Instagram is shadow banning us. They're not letting us mention. They're giving people a difficult time in finding us. Even within the podcast, it's happening. And people have sent me messages and screenshots that are disturbing, to say the least. So I need you guys to share. All right, that's how we're going to overcome this. Just share it, promote it, talk about it, tag me if you can on social media places. I think you still can on Twitter and Facebook, but I don't think right now, based on what I've seen, that you can even tag me on Instagram, which is absolutely ridiculous. So we're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep working. We're going to keep spreading the good word. I'm not slowing down. I'm not stopping. I'm not giving up. Like, we're doubling down on this thing. I just ask for the support and help from you. And you guys have been great about that up to this point. All I ask is you continue to do it. Leave the rating and review, whatever you can do to just give a little inch into the growth here that we have with Order of Man will help, because this is an uphill battle. And with the traction we're gaining lately, more people are taking notice, which is good. And it's also presents some new challenges, growing pains that we'll be having to deal with. And you can help in that mission. All right, guys, we'll be back on Friday. Until then, go out there, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.